Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters. Welcome to this week's live chat. I'm super excited to be here to talk about quilting. As always, Jessica is behind the camera monitoring the chat, so if you have any questions, be sure to type them in there and I'll try to get to them at the end. And I actually have a giveaway for you today, because we're going way back to some of my early quilts. During a type chat, somebody suggested, hey, we really want to see some of your early work. And I'm like, well, ask for it and it just might happen. So I'm going to give away a copy of my first book since we're going way back. This is the very first book I wrote. You can tell I look like a baby on the front. I went ahead and wore my glasses today since I'm feeling so old looking back at all my old quilts. But if you're watching live, all you have to do is leave a comment and Jessica will pick a winner for that book. Anyway, so like I said, the request was to show some of my early quilting, and it was a lot of fun kind of going down that rabbit hole of quilts and pulling together pictures, taking pictures of quilts I still have laying around the house. But before I show them to you, I just want you to know that this is not like a, oh, look how bad I was and look how good I am now. I was super proud of my quilting, obviously, because I took pictures of it. So I think what's important to remember is that you're doing your best quilting right now and you should be proud of it. Now, does that mean that you're going to improve and your style will change? Absolutely. And when I look back at stuff now, I'm like, wow, my style is very different. But I wasn't really comparing myself to anybody when I learned how to machine quilt. Of course, back in my day, there was no YouTube or anything like that or social media. And so Grandpa was really the only quilter I knew, and I was the only longarmer I knew. He told me I was the best in the world, so I believed him. So when I show these quilts, we're going to kind of laugh at him because you'll see, like, wow, her style is a lot different, but it's not from a, wow, I sucked thing, because I was really proud of what I was doing. And I think that you should be proud of that too. So without any further ado, let's look through the pictures. Again, so much fun. Now, when I started quilting, I actually didn't get into long arming for a couple years. I started hand quilting, and this is a picture of Grandpa showing us how to hand quilt. And what's funny is I feel like anybody could find a hand quilting frame if they tried hard enough. Somebody has one they want to give away, and so Grandpa gave us his hand quilting frame. So the very first quilts I did were hand quilted, and I was not good at it. But here's something you need to know about me. I don't have to be good at something to enjoy it. This is actually a really good trait that will get you far in life. But Grandpa was a great teacher. I didn't do very well. I would sit in between him and Jeremy, my husband, who knew how to quilt as well, and they would just be going to town, and did not do as good, but it didn't matter. But here you can see some of one of my very, very first pieced quilts. He was very patient, and I don't have any pictures of us actually quilting together. I think sometimes you're too busy enjoying the moment to like document it, but this right here in all its glory is my first ever pieced quilt. Now, I don't know what I was thinking when I picked that fabric. I'm not usually a blue, cream, maroon Americana, but this is what I went for. And so I pieced this first one, and it was on our bed for a long time. And this one actually got long arm quilted by somebody that Grandpa knew. He sent it off and had it quilted. And she did that beautiful kind of bubble pattern. And I remember getting it back and having to pay $35 to have it done. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to hand quilt it. It's going to be cheaper. I don't know what I was thinking. And it's funny, when I became when I got my long arm eventually, it was like, I can save all this money not having to pay somebody $35, which, it's funny to look back now. So that was my very first quilt. And what's funny about when you have to hand quilt your quilts, they get smaller pretty quick, right? Like you start off big, but pretty soon they get kind of small because you realize they're going to take a while. So here's one of probably my third quilt I ever pieced, a Lemoyne star with Y seams. I think sometimes it's good not to know what things are difficult and what things aren't, right? If you don't know, you'll just jump into it and assume you can do it. Now, has the Y seams, not the easiest block to piece, but it was also harder looking back on it now because Grandpa told me that we did not have to press the seams because they were on the inside of the quilt. So not a single seam in that quilt is pressed, which I don't know how I even got those points to somewhat match in the center. It's kind of voodoo to me, but that one we hand quilted as well. And this is a little tiny, like lap size quilt, but the hand quilting, very sparse, kind of in the seams. And just because I knew you'd want to see my gorgeous hand quilting, here's a picture of the back. So this is obviously in my minimalist phase, my minimalist era, not a ton of quilting there. So definitely first one's kind of hand quilted, but then it happened. I got a long arm. All right, so here is my first long arm, everybody. I got my long arm when I was 23 years old because Drake, my son, was just born. And he's 6 months old when I got the long arm. I like to say if I had got my long arm before I had children, I would not have any children now, but they're grandfathered in, so now I have them. I make that joke. It's just joking. I hope none of my kids are watching right now. But This is me on my very first long arm. Now, the reason I got a long arm is because Grandpa had seen one somewhere and suggested that I buy one. Jeremy was not really for it because he could tell by the sound of the name how expensive it was. But I was like, oh yeah. So we found a used Gamble, and we bought it over the phone. I did not see a long arm. I did not touch a long arm, did not know how it even really worked when we got it. Now, this is not really how I suggest purchasing a long arm. Like if I were going to make this like a whole section, it'd be like how not to buy a long arm. But remember, I don't have to be good at stuff to enjoy it, and that kind of falls right into here. The joke I like to make, and it's very true, is people sometimes ask why I didn't quilt on a sewing machine. I went right from hand quilting to long arming, and there's a good reason for that. We did not know that you could quilt on your sewing machine. And I praise God every day because I know that Jeremy would not have bought me a long arm had he known I could quilt on my sewing machine. So very fortunate there. I did eventually go back and learn it. So the gentleman he set up the machine, and then, like a newborn delivery doctor, they leave you with it to keep it alive, and so I'm like, I got to figure this thing out. So you can see here, I'm working from the back of the machine doing pantographs where you're kind of tracing the design. And I worked through my first several quilts with that. If you're wondering to see a close-up, I don't know if Jeremy must have took this picture. Of course, this is before cell phones. I was very intensely looking at that. But when I got the long arm, I didn't have anybody to compare myself to. I already kind of said that. I think it took me a lot longer to learn how to quilt because I didn't have a lot of resources out there. But I enjoyed the process. I'd be like, well, that's not as crappy as the last one. So I'd go show Grandpa the quilts, and he would tell me how great they were. So I think everybody needs an encouraging teacher that way. The first few quilts I did were quilt tops that Grandpa had collected over the years. And I don't have any pictures of them. This is probably one of them right there. I mean, these were special quilt tops, like hand-pieced, double knit, like there really wasn't anything I can do to make them look any worse. So through those 13 quilt tops, I learned a lot. And if I was doing the full-blown trunk show, I would tell more stories. But like I learned that there can be holes in the quilt top and you can quilt your machine in it. And it's really hard to get out. And I learned that you can make the backing too small for the quilt top, but you don't find out till you get to the end. And when I did that on one of Grandpa's quilts, I had no idea how to fix it. So I brought it back to him and I said, hey, the backing was too small. I did the only thing I could think to do, and I just chopped off that last border. And he said, okay, we'll just put that part under the pillow. So, looking back, it's just hilarious, but I was having fun with it. Again, I'm not a perfectionist, and that really helps. I'm a people pleaser. It's a totally different neuroses, but I can have fun with it and not have to be perfect. But I learned a lot through those first several quilts. So after I finished those quilts, then I, had some quilt tops of my own laying around, and these are some quilt tops I still have at our house. So some of these I kind of pulled out. This beautiful star. Obviously, I was still in my red, white, and blue era, but you can see just barely my pantograph quilting. I don't have a picture of the back of this quilt because I don't even know where that quilt is anymore. Honestly, I just found this picture randomly, but it's a beautiful flower pantograph. But if you look close, the rows are about 6 inches apart. I don't know if I was in a rush with that, or if I wasn't good at repositioning my rows, or if I just was going for a less dense look. But at this point, I'm kind of trying to figure out those pantographs. In fact, I have a couple more quilts that I have laying around my house that I use a lot that I did pantos on. So here we can see another one of my early quilts. I pieced this one as well. This one I was kind of proud of because I saw a picture on the Yahoo forum. Does anybody remember Yahoo forums? Like that was like where you went on to see what people were doing with quilting. And somebody posted a picture and I really liked this. And so I kind of plotted on a graph paper and I made all of those are little squares and it took for freaking ever. And of course I thought, well, now it's time to quilt it. I'm going to do a panto over it. Now, what's really funny with that, just looking at you wouldn't know, but this quilt is so much like Grandpa. He always had sashing strips in his quilts. He would make his blocks and then he would decide how big he wanted the quilt to be and then make the sashing accordingly. So all his quilts had sashing like this, and that's just how I thought you did a quilt for the longest time. So you can see my little 1-inch sashing. I probably would not do that now because I don't like sewing sashing. But here you can see my beautiful loop-de-loop panto, right? Like I've now graduated from the flowers and I'm doing loops, and they're even a little closer together. They're not 6 inches apart. They're, they're a little bit closer. But I got to point out, see my little arrows? I don't know what I was doing, but I started the rows of the panto so they didn't even run off the edge of the quilt. Like they're just within an inch inside of the quilt. So just hanging out there. Not sure why. Why I didn't see that was a problem, I didn't. But here's what's fun. This quilt, I mean, it's old and it's been used a lot and it's still holding together. So I'm happy about it. But look at the quilting is still fairly far apart. And here, a finger for scale. Like I got to show them exactly what this looks like here. So again, I'm just like having fun with the Pantos. It's funny because now, like sometimes I have people ask, like, do I teach on that? I'm like, oh, I'd have to remind myself how to quilt on those before. All right, here's one of those early quilts with the pantograph with the hearts. Now, here's what's funny about this. I was so proud of this. I took a picture of the front and the back. Don't worry, you'll see that here in a second. And this is one of the pictures that I would show my customers as examples of my quilting skills. So if I had a customer that wanted a big old heart, they could have asked me for it. I would have been able to do it. I mean, this thing was like huge. And I'm not really one now that loves quilting hearts, but at that moment I was. And here, yes, I took a picture of the back so that the customer could see, yes, you can quilt these hearts and they're gorgeous on the front or back. Now, what I love about this quilt, every time I see this picture, it reminds me of a trunk show I did one time. I don't even remember where it was. And I was showing like some of these early pictures, like, you know, if I can do it, anybody can do it. Look where I started out. And later on in the class, one of the girls, some person was like, I'm not going to be good at this. And her friend goes, remember the hearts? So remember the heart. If you're feeling frustrated with your swirls, just remember the heart. Every master was once a disaster. Everybody has to learn. And this was just me learning how to control my machine. And again, I was super proud of this. This was not like me taking a picture because I didn't like how it looked. This was me like, hey, I want people to see this. But as all things do, I had to leave the Pantos behind. Actually, it didn't take long. I didn't really love working from the back of the quilts. I like to kind of be up front. And I decided now it's time to do some custom quilting. So this particular quilt I pieced, it's an Irish chain around the world. And what's funny about this is I saw this quilt on an episode of Simply Quilts. Does anybody remember that with Alex Anderson? I saw it. I was like, I want that book. I ordered the book online. It came and I made the quilt. And I loved it. And so I thought, I'm going to custom quilt this. So this is one of my early, like, working from the front. And I thought, you know what, what's more custom than diagonal lines with nothing in between them, right? So it's hard to see, but I just did some diagonal lines in there. I mean, these lines are so far apart. Now, you know, of course, I would quilt that sucker to death. But at the time, I guess I was, like I said, keeping it kind of minimalist. I think I took a picture of the back so you can see, or here you can see, like, just how minimal they are. Now, when I started stitching in the ditch, trying my straight lines, one of my favorite stories, it kind of makes fun of my husband just a bit, but he knows and it's okay. I was trying it on a rail fence and I'm like, I'm going to try stitching in the ditch. I see people talking about this. And I got just a few like minutes in and it was bad. And I looked for the quilt because I really wanted a picture. I know I have it somewhere, but I couldn't find it. And at that point, Jeremy walks in and he looks at it and he's like, oh, maybe you should stick with the Pantos. Now, he was trying to be encouraging, but all that to me was like a challenge. I'm like, challenge accepted. So after that quilt, and then I finally realized you should use rulers if you want to stitch straight lines, and then tried this quilt. So this was the second attempt at straight lines and stitching in the seams. And there you can see just how far apart that quilting is. And I say it all the time, like when you're done with the quilt and you bind it and you wash it and you love it, you don't see the quilting anymore. It just becomes the quilt. These are quilts that have been around my house for years. The kids have built forts with them. They've been everywhere. And it's not like I look at them on the daily and like, oh, look at that quilting. It's just the quilt. So you really have to trust that it's going to be okay, especially when you're 2 inches from your quilt, not loving how it's turning out. And then there's a hand for scale, just in case you're wondering just how far apart this quilting is. The lines are more-ish than straight. But again, I was super proud of it, obviously, right? Because I still have the quilt around. So doing some straight lines there, and then even more. So this was I was trying to find pictures to take of the back that weren't so dirty because this quilt has been used a lot. But there you can kind of see some of my early work. And you can even check out my awesome binding too. That was before I learned about double fold binding. It's just one piece left over. Anyway, you live and you learn. All right, this quilt is kind of funny because I made this also after watching an episode of Simply Quilts. Watching Alex Anderson was really bad for my checkbook. I would buy a lot of fabric and books after hearing about it. This is a paper pieced twisted 9 patch. So these are little triangles. And when I first quilted this or made this quilt, I felt super artsy, by the way. I just quilted it with straight lines because I was scared to do anything different in it. So I just did some just stitching in the ditch. I was at that point where I was afraid to really put any quilting in it. And this is really a bulky kind of quilt. So I just went around the outline of the blocks. But then fast forward a few years later, I don't remember exactly when, I had in my mind, you know what, I didn't do a really good job on that. I want to put more quilting in it. So I took the binding off, loaded it on my machine and added more quilting, but only got about halfway and decided, you know what, I'm not loving this. So the quilt is still unbound, not even finished, and I don't know what to do with it. But so I have some of the pictures of the quilting I added to it. So when you see like the swirls and stuff, that was years later or a year later or so. So again, you can see the block, and then I thought it'd be fun to get metallic thread, so I did some wiggly lines in the individual strips of the block. So here I'm kind of experimenting with other designs, other textures, we'll call it custom quilting, and it was pretty brave to use metallic thread. I don't know where that came from, but it looked really pretty on there. And maybe one of these days I'll go finish it up. But here is some of my early swirls. Let's just let that soak in for a second, right? So somebody on the type chat before we went live was like, I just did the Swirls challenge video series and I'm giving myself an F. And I said, you can't give yourself an F. I won't allow it. You know, there's no Fs. I said, don't worry. You will see some swirls that will like make you feel better. This is some of my early swirls. I love them. I thought they looked great. Now I look at them and I know I can do a little bit different, but it's just interesting to see how the style develops. So a lot longer, a little bit more squared off, definitely some early swirl work. That was probably towards I'm like, okay, you know what? Maybe I might like this. Now, why I thought it would be easier to quilt swirls with, metallic thread, I'm not sure. That really didn't make it any easier. But then there's my early attempt at serpentine lines. So they look more like flames or hands. Not sure what I was going with that, but again, it was kind of fun. So that particular quilt, maybe one of these days I'll finish it up, but it's going to be like that forever probably. After I started kind of branching out and kind of trying different designs, I realized I really liked quilting and I didn't like piecing as much. So I started taking customer quilts and I also started volunteering for charities. And this was a Quilts for Kids thing, and I loved it because I can get, baby quilts and then practice designs. And then this particular example is also some of my early swirls. So please check out the beautiful waves. Little swirls going, little stitching in the ditch around like that. That's the finished quilt, y'all. That was the picture that I took to put for my customers so that they would be awed by my not only my great stitching in the ditch, but my beautiful waves that went across the bottom. Again, I look at it now because I would just quilt that sucker to death. But again, it's funny how we evolve. But the more you do things like swirls, the better they get and the more, refined they get. Here you can see the swirls are looking a little bit better. This is, obviously a grandmother's flower garden. I left all the colorful fabrics unquilted. I just stitched in the ditch around them. I couldn't think of what else to do, and then just did swirls in the background. This is the only picture I have of it, and you can see the swirls aren't quite round. They're more ovalish. But hey, they're a little bit more consistent in their spacing, a little bit more round than before. But about this time, I was kind of taking customer quilts. So sometimes I'm asked, like, how long was I quilting before I felt comfortable taking customer quilts? It was a couple years, but I gotta say, like, I was just putting stuff out there. Thank goodness, nobody wanted heart pantographs at that time. But I think to quilt for customers, to go off on a tangent here, you just need to be able to do one or two designs, consistently, and then that's enough to get started. So I didn't even know everything when I started quilting for customers. Now, if we're looking, kind of keeping with the swirl evolution, this quilt was a little bit later on. This was the last quilt that Grandpa pieced before he passed away, and this was made out of ties. So we pieced this crazy tie quilt. It's actually here at our event center, and this is one of the two quilts that I would run in the burning building to get out. So, but he would collect ties. I know Jessica remembers this because it was her grandpa. I mean, by the bags, like bagfuls. And he would not pay more than $0.25 per tie. He was not going to be paying big money for it. Then we had to take the ties apart, and then we made him in a crazy quilt and then stitch it. But then I needed to quilt it, and he was just diagnosed with cancer. I was trying to finish it up real quick, so I just quilted some big ass swirls all over it, just big old swirls. And if you're wondering just how big, I took a picture with my hand so you can see just how big those swirls are. The quilting doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be over the top to be impactful. My most important thing with this quilt is I wanted to get it quilted so he could see it finished. And if that meant big swirls, that just meant big swirls. So for those of you that are like, can I quilt swirls not densely? Yes, you can. I mean, those are hand-sized swirls. So there you go. But that particular quilt kind of shows the swirl progression, as it were. A few more quilts I found. Again, I just brought up quilts, like I looked up quilts just until I started quilting for customers. So this is really early on, but this quilt was one I made for Chloe. So my daughter, who's now 20 and a half, this was her little baby quilt. And I made it's like a rag quilt and then I quilted it. So again, kind of gives us a time frame. So that would have been 20 years ago. Quilted on my long arm, and so we can see some of the beautiful echoing and swirls coming off of it, right? Like, I mean, I love that I made that quilt, and I feel bad because I didn't make one for Haley, but it's like, I don't know. It's just so unlike anything I would do now. Sometimes I look at some of these older quilts, and I'm like, I don't even remember who I was when I was doing that. I was tired and sleep deprived because of kids. But you can see my little echoing and my little swirls there. So again, definitely not quite, it's definitely right for the time, but not what I'm doing now. But I thought that little flower was kind of cute with the pointy leaf. I liked that. I like that little thing, so pretty cute. All right, this particular quilt, I can't remember where this fits in the timeline. It's actually a fleece blanket, and it was one we made for Grandpa, and then gave it to him, and then after he passed away, we might have stole it back. Sorry, Grandma. But he was in the Navy, and so we made this quilt, and I decided to quilt it. So it's like a rag edge quilt. But the reason I had to take pictures of it is because it shows some of my quilting. So this is my attempt at McTavishing. So Karen McTavish teaches like this technique. She was one of my quilting idols when I started quilting. Karen McTavish, I was like, oh, I love her. And so this was one of my first attempts at that on the fleece. And I think it turned out pretty good. Not super dense, but still very pretty. Now, what I want to point out though, is look at those ribbon candy on the side. I mean, those, I think they're supposed to be ribbon candy. They look more like blobs. I'm pretty sure I was going for ribbon candy there, but not quite touching. I will say they are consistent in their spacing, so I'll give myself that. But it's just kind of funny, again, to kind of look back at those. And here you can see just how far apart those McTavishing lines are. Now, I probably didn't want to go too dense because it was fleece, but I don't know. It's just kind of funny. And then check out those ribbon candies. They are consistent. Like I said, I'll give myself that, but I don't know why I didn't think I needed to make them touch, but who knows? All right, now this is the last quilt I'll leave you with. Again, I just kind of pulled up some of the earlier ones. This quilt not only has pictures of my oldest on there, he's gonna just love it if he sees this live chat. This is the quilt that I made to hang up at a quilt shop to put my business card on to get customers. All right, so this is me doing my best work at that time, knowing I'm about to kill it with customers. I'm about to be so busy quilting for customers. It's going to be great. Now, good thing I did actually get customers. I don't know if it's because of this quilt or not, but this particular quilt hung up at the Corbin Mill Quilt Shop. For those of that are around here, it's in the same town that our quilt shop is in now. So it's just kind of surreal. I had this kind of moment of looking at that quilt thinking, I can't believe I own a quilt shop now. We're getting ready to celebrate our 10th anniversary. But anyway, this particular quilt. So this is me thinking, I'm going to show them what I can do. So again, not to be like I sucked, because again, I was super proud of what I was doing, but it just shows where I was then. So we can see some little scallops in the border. Okay, not too bad. What you can't see in the black is some tiny swirls. Now, why I thought I would use fabric that you can't even see the quilting, not sure what that was about, but maybe I was going for the hidden quilting look. Don't worry, I got a picture on the back, so just wait. And then I thought, I'm going to do a big swirl in the center. I don't even know what that is. I think it's supposed to be a big swirl. I think it's supposed to look puffy. It looks like an E. I don't even know. It looks like a snake or something. I don't know why I thought that was really cool, but I did. I thought that was neat. It's going to show how dense my quilting can be to puff this thing up. You know what it reminds me of? With that fabric, it looks like the 4th of July snakes, right? That you light and it that's what it looks like. And then in those sashing, the gray, the only place that you would actually be able to see some quilting, I left unquilted. And I'm sure it's because I couldn't decide what to do, but what the heck? So anyway, I'm very thankful that person let me hang this up. But in case you were wondering, here's a little bit more close up of the picture. Now he's just so cute. I might have to hang this up at the house, I think. I think he would really like that. But the pictures are so puffy because it's quilted so dense around them. It's funny. And I don't know why I thought people would see pictures of my kid and be like, yeah, I want her to quilt for me. I'm not sure I thought this all out. But check out the back. So this will show you my beautiful swirl work and also my inability to deal with tension, right? So you can see all those little black things are the black thread from the front showing up on the back. Again, I guess I was hoping that none of the people would look at the back of the quilt and be like, oh, she's obviously going to, quilt my quilt with bad tension. This also should have been my first indication that, hey, don't use white thread on the back and black on the top. But there you go. Those are my swirls in all their glory. So I look at them now and I'm like, okay, I can see what I was doing wrong. I wasn't finishing the swirl. I wasn't changing direction. I wasn't echoing, right? But the more you do it, the better you get. And so this absolutely proves it. But again, I cannot stress this enough. I was super proud of this. And this is what I was putting out for everybody to see. And so, there you go. And then here's an even more close-up shot. So you can see the tension's really bad. But there you go. Kind of fun. So really, I had to throw this quilt in and be like, okay, but if you're watching and you don't know any of my work, I really am a good quilter now. But this is, several years after the fact. I am going to say it doesn't take 20 years to get good at machine quilting. That's not it at all. It just takes some consistent practice. It takes like doing it over and over again and being okay with sucking to get to that point. It sucks to suck, but we have to suck to get good at it. But the one thing I will say, since I loved long arming, I really loved it more than the piecing. I did more of that than anything else. I didn't piece a whole lot of quilts. I quilted for customers. I quilted for charities. I didn't want to sew. I wanted to quilt. And so I got really good at it. I understand, though, if I had liked to piece, too, I might not have spent as much time long arming, so it would have taken me a little bit longer. But the more you do it, the easier it gets. I 100% promise it. And when you look at what I've done before, okay, like if I can do it, anybody can do it. It just takes a little bit of practice and work at it. All right, so that's where we'll leave you off. You'll have to imagine how the next 15 years went, because after quilting for customers and then finally writing books and opening the shop and doing videos, it's just kind of snowballed and it's turned into a crazy fun time that I can't believe I get to do this as a job. Never thought that would happen. When we first got the long arm, the whole idea, like I said, was I told my husband, if I never have to pay somebody to quilt a quilt for the rest of my life, it'll pay for itself. So that's kind of how I justified it. All right. Question about Build a Quilt. So last live chat, I kind of talked about our new block of the month, or block of the month starting up for a new year. And it says, if Build a Quilt starts in January, when will the finishing kits come out? Those come out in April. So that's when we have like the big reveal of what the layouts for the blocks will be, those optional kits. I'm long arm quilting a quilt that has sewing machine quilted applique blocks on the backing. These blocks will be empty of quilting. Is that okay? Okay, so it is okay. But if you remember that picture quilt of Drake, since that area was unquilted, it puffed up a lot. And sometimes that can distract away from the quilting. It doesn't hurt anything. It's just going to give it a different look. You could add some tacks in there if you're worried about like little tacks in there. I wouldn't worry too much about it. I think it'd be fine. Did your grandpa get to see what a wonderful business you built with what he taught you? No, he didn't, which is kind of sad. But it is kind of a legacy he left me. I like to say, like, the person that influenced my life the most for machine quilting never machine quilted a day in his life. He never did, but he still influenced me. That just means you don't have to know what you're doing to influence people. No, he passed away before the first book, but I do know that Grandpa would have wanted me to have a quilt shop. Grandpa would have wanted me, that's what I tell Jeremy, Grandpa would have wanted me to have a long arm education center with 6 long arms in it. No, I'm just kidding. But no, he left a great legacy in my life. What is pantograph quilting? Okay, so I didn't really talk about this too much. On the back of a long arm, you can lay out a long design, and then it has a light on the back that you kind of trace with the light, and then it's quilting on the front. So as you're like tracing it here, it's quilting, so it's kind of like you're kind of following a line, but you're still free motioning. And pantographs are great if you want like really detailed designs, but you don't feel comfortable free motioning. So like if somebody wanted a soccer ball with whatever, that would be great. But like I said, I like to work from the front of the machine. And then last question, how did I get into Handy Quilter? So that first machine was a Gamble. We bought it used. I quilted the heck out of that thing. And then when I was ready for a new machine or a different one, the Gamble was so old, which is fine, it didn't have a needle up and down button. So I had to hand crank the wheel on the front anytime I wanted to raise the needle. And after a while, my thumb got really sore from doing that. It's funny because when we got that long arm, you could add a stitch regulator. It was an add-on for $3,000. And Jeremy was like, no, I'm not going to do that, because he'd already bought me a long arm. So that's why I learned without a stitch regulator. Anyway, when it was time to look for a different machine, I really loved Handy Quilter as a company. I had done some teaching stuff for them. I had met the people that worked there, and I loved the machine. And so it seemed like a really natural fit. And then, of course, had a Handy Quilter for, 12 years, 15 years now, and love it. So that's kind of how that all came about. So thank you for humoring me and letting me kind of show some of my earlier quilting. Again, I think it's kind of fun to see how our tastes change, but just remember, like, it's a process. Every creative bit is a process. Everything that we do is creative, whether it's doing video chats, whether it's doing pattern writing or making quilts. It's kind of fun to see that evolve. So be proud of what you're doing, because you're doing your best quilting right now. And I think that's what I want you to take away from this. And the winner of the book is Katie Abbott. So Katie, email us at customerservice@quiltingismytherapy.com, and we'll send you my very first book. So, well, I appreciate you all hanging out with me and chatting with me. I'll be back next Thursday for another live chat. Until then, everybody stay safe and happy